Hi, Dad. Do you have problems listening to your daughter? Well, you might think, well, of course I have problems listening to my daughter. We barely communicate. And that might be true, and that might be the problem. But the real thing is about listening, and dads, is that we a lot of times just like to communicate. And when we communicate, we like to communicate to our daughters in a way that we think they are, rather than sometimes who they are. In other words, we want them to still be our little princess. But listening is a learned skill. Let me say that again. Listening is a learned skill. It's much, much easier to talk. We learned to talk when we were toddlers, and we learned to listen by our parents telling us, don't do this and don't do that. But the art of communication ends up being both listening and speaking. And in between that listening and speaking is understanding. So many times what happens with communications, especially when they're strained communications between a father and a daughter, when we're trying to understand and we're trying to help shape her world and help her understand our world so that we can communicate with each other, the part that many times for men that we fall down on is listening. Because we think, well, if we're listening, it's just normal part of conversation. But the reality is, many, many times, I know this is me, it's probably you, when I'm listening to someone, instead of listening, what I'm really doing is I'm thinking. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. Well, what happens with that? You can't hear what's going on because you're not listening. And I'll try to calm people. You probably do this too, where I'm talking to somebody on the phone, and the conversation is lagging a little, and I'm looking over here at my computer, and I've got some email that I can go, and I'll start communicating a little bit with them. But all of a sudden they say, Ken, are you there? And I realize that they know, even though I think I'm covering great, I'm just here multitasking, just trying to get my work done, but I'm not listening, and the communication stops. And when the communication stops because I stopped listening, on the other end, they're going, well, there isn't any communication. What am I talking? Why am I beating my gums? So, if we can assume that conversation involves both speaking, hearing, and understanding, what do we need to do, especially to be able to learn how to communicate with our daughters? Well, there's a very simple tool that a lot of marriage counselors use, where they say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to speak, you to listen, and when the speaker is done, I want you to repeat back to the speaker what they said and say, is that what you said? This is what I heard. This is what I understood. And you can do this as a game, or you can do this as just a thought process for yourself. Meaning, you can actually talk to your daughter and say, hey, we've had a hard time communicating on this. Or you can stop and say, look, this conversation is not engaging. We're not both engaging. Let's do the game of I speak, you tell me what I said, and then you speak. If you don't do that, and you can laugh about it and you can have fun, or you're going, oh, this is kind of hokey, why am I doing this? You might just try yourself saying, just to practice it without her mirroring you. So when she says something, you say, okay, well, this is what I heard, and then respond and answer. And so you can do this with her either mentally, or you can do it as a game and say, okay, here's the rules of the game, here's what we're going to do. All I'm suggesting is that you try it, because many times that breakdown in communication, and we always talk about communication, is because we're not listening. And sometimes they're not listening. But if we can break that and end up having a communication of listening, understanding, and speaking, we can have a conversation rather than just talking. Thanks for stopping by.